You're very welcome along to the polling station. We've been reflecting on Cheltenham, but we're looking ahead to what's going to be an interesting Rishi Sunak spring statement, the repercussions for the betting in terms of the Conservative Party going forward. 2.5 weeks to the French elections, and we're going to talk about that as well. And of course, Neil Channing, the myriad of people who effectively want to bet on the golf and double it up into the French elections.
How I'm sorry, does that mean you wanted me to start?
Yes, why not? Why not start? You told me to go.
Okay, well, we haven't been on for a couple of weeks. I've lost the whole theory of how this thing works.
How have you been?
I've been following as ever. I've been making my traditional 800 clicks a day on the exit date of Boris Johnson, just to see if it's changed since 6 minutes earlier when I looked at it previously. I did notice that while Cheltenham was on, or just before Cheltenham, 2024 traded odds on for the first time in a hell of a long time. Only marginally odds on, and it kind of settled around even money. But it now obviously, you know, this is all to do with Partygate falling out of the news and Ukraine coming into the news. I saw him saying that he was desperate to get out of Ukraine, out to Ukraine, Boris Johnson. Presumably to see what effect that would have on his poll ratings. But the market on 2022 went to its highest point yet at one point of 3.6, but it's kind of back into about 3.2 now. I mean, I was talking to somebody about it the other day who's got quite a strong view, who I would consider to be a good judge, and he said to me, he thinks it's a bit out of whack at the moment, that, you know, everybody seems to be recency bias. Everyone's suddenly forgotten about the cost of living crisis and the fuel prices and whatever, and actually it's economics that drives people to make their voting decisions, and there's a lot of trouble down the track for Boris Johnson, and he would have recommended a better this stage on 2022. He thought 2024 around evens was getting a bit carried away.
Yeah, actually, the last time we were on, Paul, you spoke about the fact that he's kind of more secure now in terms of this year than he has been almost at any stage. I picked up the Sunday Times on, I got up, I had a lie-in on Monday, picked up the Sunday Times, picked up the wrong paper, picked up the one from 2 weeks previously, which I didn't actually realise until I read the piece. So it was a piece about Boris Johnson, the whole Russian situation, and Lord Lebedev, and it was absolutely astounding. I could not get over the role that he's played in his lordship and so on and so forth. But at the same time, Boris seems to be doing very well on the Ukraine crisis in terms of the polling.
Right. Well, only it's merely a bounce from a poor position. I mean, look at the recent polls. Labour's still on 39 or 40, 4, 5, even 6% up. That isn't a rally around the flag bounce. You know, compare that to what's happening in France, or even Biden's approval rating rise. Boris Johnson isn't. I think he's lost the ability to connect now with at least half the population, probably 55%, and it's going to be very, very hard for the Tories to get back up to anywhere near 40% now, and that's their problem going forward. The Russia scandal, the Lebedev situation, it's just a repeat of Trump, right? Where unbelievable information comes out every day. The serious newspapers cover it. People who understand politics, who know a little bit about history and precedent, say, "Oh, well, that's got to finish him," you know, because no one's ever done that. And then everyone just moves on. They just move on, and it's some other nonsense the next day. But I think what has changed now is that the Tories are seen pretty stuck where they are. It's going to be very, very hard for them to turn that around in any situation.
Well, let me just ask you a quick question, because on this market, when Johnson goes, there's always been this massive assumption within the market that 2024 and 2022 are the possibilities, and 2023 can't really win. If Johnson gets through this year, they're kind of stuck with him till the election. But just recently, 2023 has actually traded quite short. You know, it was as big as 6-1, maybe in the heat of the Partygate stuff, and it's trading closer to 3-1 now. Can you see a roadmap where Johnson gets through this year, perhaps because some people sort of take their letters back, or they're less reluctant to try and get rid of him because of the situation with Ukraine and obviously the cost of living crisis and all that. But they then have a sort of rethink and think, yeah, but we really don't want this guy for the next election.
100%. I think that even before any of this Partygate and the collapse in his poll ratings and their poll ratings, I think there were probably a number of Tories who always thought that would be a good plan, understanding that he wouldn't be their best bet at the next election, Sunak would, and ideally you change leader a year before the election, or 9 months, give them a honeymoon period. So there's absolutely the prospect there. Plus, of course, like I say, they're down in the polls. They're in a bad place. The nature of the environment with Ukraine makes it hard to change a leader at this point. But if in 6 months they're still down in the polls, they're still kind of Labour have an entrenched lead, right? You know, we'll talk about local elections in a bit, but that'll be pivotal. There's bound to be some by-elections. Yeah, I can absolutely see it starting up again in the summer, in the autumn, and it will be. I think making 2024 is a hell of an ask in this environment.
Over to you, William. Rishi Sunak's spring statement tomorrow. What are the repercussions? What are we going to expect? He obviously has there's been a lot of borrowing throughout the pandemic, but people are, they're facing into an extreme crisis in Western terms, in terms of cost of living and so forth. So this is going to be pretty big stuff.
Yeah, it's a really, really big moment for him. It probably sets, I think, his political trajectory for the rest of the year. If he manages to make it through, let's say, the worst repercussions of the cost of living crisis, you'd imagine it'd be very hard, nearly impossible, to kick him out the final two in the leadership contest if one happened this year. Again, these things can go in lots of different ways, but if you were to have a leadership election this year, which I don't think is impossible, Johnson's in a strong position, but I'd agree with the comments Paul made, that it's not an uber solid one, then you're looking at the favourite here with his biggest political test, and one where somebody's going to have to lose out, and he's got to make that wider judgment as to who. Is it more in favour of Tory members who'd be looking for things like a fuel tax cut, etc., or does he try to spread everything across the peer fair and sort of more prime ministerial, a bit more compassionate? In terms of what we can expect, without wanting to get too wonky, too economical, there's a bit of headroom for Sunak still to play with potentially. He can give himself the appearance of being not quite Mr. Furlough, but Mr. Free Money to a point. The issue is going to be, where does he put it, and how much of that can he put into support? Because as we heard Martin Lewis, money saving expert, say, this is as grim as it's ever been with regard to cost of living. And short of massive government intervention, there's going to be a lot of people who unfortunately find themselves in a really difficult position. And that is the sort of stuff that will be too big not to have an effect on polls. Sometimes you get these political situations where voting groups are fairly insulated from them. So as such, you don't see it feed into polls because people think, well, that's not they don't think it affects them, so you don't see them change the answers they give to the pollsters. Won't be the case with whatever happened to cost of living. So there's lots to be expected. I don't
know whether I totally buy that. I mean, we had a general election in 2019, a year when 4 million families were living in poverty. 4 million families that were in work were living in poverty, and 1 million food bank parcels were given out. I mean, unless it directly affects your family, I think a lot of people don't really pay much attention to that. And I definitely don't think that Rishi Sunak's thinking, I'll tell you what, the OBR forecasts, what a shock, they turn out to be completely wrong, and I've got a whole bunch of fiscal headway. What shall I do with it? He wants to keep that for his leadership pitch, doesn't he? He doesn't want to waste that on saving Boris Johnson. He wants to do a giveaway budget the year before the election. He doesn't want to do anything like that now.
Well, hang on. He is doing a leadership pitch now, isn't he? Right?
Yeah.
He's having to win MPs over. There is whether it's this year, next year, 2024, there is a battle going on for the hearts and mind of Tory MPs. With regards to what you said about the poverty thing, the point is, though, those 4 million families in 2019, I'm going to guess that the number of Tory voters amongst them is very, very small.
Absolutely.
The cost of living crisis is not just going to hit the usual suspects.
Yeah.
You know, they've kicked welfare enough, they've kicked public services enough. This is going to hit people on fixed incomes, pensioners. The people most worried about what's coming down the track are pensioners, their core vote. And I think
I'll definitely take that point. Although, you know, obviously, when they're talking about putting up national insurance, that's not affecting pensioners. Now people are saying, oh, Rishi Sunak's going to be under pressure to reverse on the national insurance rise. Well, exactly what you said. Those people don't vote Tory. Why would he care about them?
I guess so. With the national insurance rise, that's probably as much for Tory members and MPs who just hate the idea of the same tax rise. And again, it's employers, right? The employers groups and many particular big employers are major Tory donors. They don't want to pay extra national insurance.
I would have thought he's quite likely to do something on fuel tax, though, because the Tories love supporting people on fuel tax, and it's a massively regressive way to give money away. So it actually plays quite well by the sort of thing that they do.
And also, I believe he's got support from Labour for a reduction of up to 5p duty already.
He's got support from Labour. He's got support from Labour. That's basically it. I agree with it. I agree with the Prime Minister. We're going to support him on this one.
Yeah, so he does have a free shot with that. I mean, I think that's a good point, but I would also sort of, what I'm trying to generally express when I say about the cost of living really affects people is that I think that these issues are so wide that everybody will feel them, and as such, I think that's the sort of thing that's more likely to just break out from being politics, you know, which is something that for all we sat here talking about it, I don't believe a huge amount of people engage all the time, into just daily life. A lot of people already getting upset and angry and asking why can't politicians, etc., do more. And I think we'll see a bit more of that, unfortunately, going into the summer.
How is he suddenly, as Neil mentioned, William, how is he suddenly odds on to be 2024 or later?
How is he suddenly odds on to be 2024
or later for his departure date?
Well, I think there is a lot of recency bias in those moves. We've seen that with really sharp markets swings, whether they be on exchanges, whether they be even with us. We've adapted quite quickly to them. I think also it's now plausible, right? Maybe not probable, but it's technically plausible to see a way where he gets to, if not very much the end of this year, then it's, I think, possibly plausible to see a way in which he might make it to a next general election. I don't necessarily think that's the likeliest case, but it's less impossible than it might have seemed even a month ago or a month and a bit ago. And also, it is quite possible that, even though I know MPs, Tory MPs especially, will be thinking in their own self-interest, it's also quite possible that they might be changing their minds and opinions about him because they're seeing him perform a different role, they're seeing him act in a different way. And also, when the heat goes off, not to say that everybody's forgotten what happened with Partygate, and that will come back up eventually with Gray and the Met, but when the heat comes off, then suddenly I think people are sort of less concerned, or people around are less concerned about what's going to happen next, what's going to drop next, particularly as also, and again, I doubt that he's going to suddenly start going past Labour and rocketing into a poll lead, but it would appear that the bleeding's been stopped for now. And also, again, he has, I think, had quite a bit of a benefit for appearing to be statesman-like in this crisis, as much as you can say that he has, if that makes any sense.
I
just
think
quickly, can I just say on the Boris leaving, and I hadn't actually looked at the replacement market for a while, just because of Cheltenham, basically. I just find it quite interesting. I hadn't realised Ben Wallace had shortened up so much, And obviously, Foreign Affairs Select Committee and everybody's kind of wise guy horse in this race, Tom Tugendhat, are both shortened up, obviously, because of the situation in Ukraine. Whereas Jeremy Hunt, who's very much on manoeuvres in the last few days, making a lot of noise about the Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe situation, and Liz Truss, who ultimately, was responsible for getting Nazanin released, they don't seem to have shortened up at all. Does that surprise anybody? I was kind of surprised by that.
I'm not surprised, but I mean, Wallace is miles ahead in the Conservative Home League table now, miles ahead. I think I'm surprised Truss has drifted, and I can't help but think that what's going on there is that I think median vote is totally unconvinced with Liz Truss, right? Median commentator is totally unconvinced with Liz Truss. But I do think she cuts through really well with Tory members and, hardcore Tories. And I don't personally think she has had a bad war. I think, she's done herself a favour pretty much being centre stage. So I am surprised about that, but I'm not surprised to see Wallace and Tugendhat shortly. I mean, if we're in the agenda's changed, it's very possible that this crisis goes on for 4 years or something, or longer, right? And in that situation,
it'd be amazing if it didn't. Really?
Well, events and all that. I mean, who knows what's going to happen?
I can't for the life of me see Putin being alive in 4 years, not to mind surviving.
Well, I mean, this is what we're going to. If Putin were removed quickly, sometime this year, I think that to a large extent the news agenda might move on. Some kind of settlement would be there, but I think with this we are in this for the long term now as an issue, and therefore an ex-military person, especially in Tugendhat's case, he's the guy who called it. He's the guy who was saying this for years, right? Has completely called out dark money in London and donors to the Conservative Party. And I think that if it happened tomorrow and we had a TV hustings, I think that it would change the game. And I think that someone like Tugendhat or maybe Penny Mordaunt would significantly rise in that scenario.
In general, William, how is Starsports on the market, the Boris markets? Because I imagine quite good. I imagine people have been backing that he's gone this year.
Yeah, we're in a pretty decent position, and things have definitely gone our way since the peak or the nadir, depending on what position you're in, of Partygate. I think that we listen, as things are pretty good, but it would be dangerous, I think, for us to rest on our laurels, given that there are any number of events that could bring Johnson's many weaknesses, I'll say to be diplomatic, back into the spotlight. Not to mention, of course, just Johnson himself. He himself is a constant walking weakness. Case in point, even though I think he did it to placate, he did it clearly to appeal to an audience, but the Ukraine is basically Brexit stuff was a big backfire, right? Even amongst some of the people who...
I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
I even saw some diehard Johnson heads recoil at that, which I thought...
Yeah, I think that's yesterday's fish and chip wrap.
It changed. The same day, Sky News' headline was Prime Minister accused again of being a threat to national security, right? And we know what the Sundays have been like on that subject for weeks. And of course, all he did was he made that comment, and then he released that little footage of him jogging on the beach. And everybody talked about that.
I'm thinking of taking an official photographer jogging. Actually, it's what my image really needs, I think, at the moment.
To tell you what your image does need, local elections.
Yes, please.
Elections.
Yes, please.
What have we got?
Well, obviously, it's mostly London in the May local elections. I mean, there are elections all around the country. You have this cycle whereby bits of the country have their local elections in different years, and it's every 4 years. 4 years ago in London, or 4 years ago nationally, Labour was, funnily enough, up about 4 points in the polls, 3 to 4 points, which is basically where they are now. And the news reports at the time of the local elections, after the 2018 local elections, said that it was basically a no-score draw. They said Corbyn's Labour have been a bit disappointing. They could have taken a couple of councils in London and they failed. And it was a lot of talk about people that had voted UKIP in the previous election, and the way that that vote had broke had worked out okay for Theresa May. Now, Keir Starmer's coming into this local election by saying, oh, you know, we're going to have a really tough task in these elections because Theresa May was absolutely coming into this, you know, wounded, totally on the floor. It was the worst way for her to come in. You know, they were 4 points down, 3 points down. So he's building it up to say that it's not going to go very well. But then a poll came out the other day, Delta poll. Let me get it here. I had it here somewhere, written on my Racing Post, I think. Yeah, Delta poll had 54 for Labour. This is London. How would you vote in the local elections? 24 for the Tories, 9 for the Lib Dems and 5 for the Greens. Now, lots of people were saying from that, well, the 4 big councils, you know, Labour must have a chance in all of them. And the 4 big councils are basically Barnet, Westminster, Wandsworth and Hillingdon. So I saw this fella from Opinion, the polling company that kind of broke away from YouGov, and he was on Twitter today, and he made a load of arguments for why Labour won't do as well in the local elections. And it became quite an interesting thread. There was a guy saying that you basically have to knock off half a dozen from the national election polling when you're looking at the local elections if there's a big lead for Labour, because it doesn't work out in local elections. And I think that's because of turnout. Obviously, older people are much more likely to turn out. Older people are much more likely to vote Labour. Turnouts are going to be lower in local elections. So national polling doesn't work out for Labour in local elections. That makes a lot of sense to me. He was also talking about, you know, how we've got this Rishi Sunak statement coming tomorrow. And if you know, if that goes well for the Tories and the, you know, obviously the press are on their side generally, if they can spin it in their favour, it looks a lot better for them, especially with the Partygate stuff kind of slightly forgotten about and all the Ukraine stuff coming in. If you'd have imagined 3 or 4 weeks ago how this local election might look for the Tories, you'd have said it could be quite bleak. But yeah, this fella Chris from Opinion, he basically said, Tory, 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 which would, I think, be a surprise, because in Wandsworth, Sadiq Khan won by something like 11 points, I think, in Wandsworth. And so it would be hard to see the Tories really winning in Wandsworth. I think they'll win in Hillingdon, they'll win in Westminster, and Barnet is on a bit of a knife edge. But I was interested by him saying that Labour could win all 4. Oh, sorry, the Tories could win all 4.
Did he say what percentage of the seats are in London?
No, we were specifically just talking about those 4.
That's talking about. He didn't say, because I know there's a lot.
Well, he was making a case generally for why Labour wouldn't do as well in London.
Outside. I don't think you're going to see much change in London this election or any other, really, right? Anymore. Not that much.
Well, I think somebody else made quite a good point that coming out of the election, Labour will definitely not want to focus on what happened in London unless they just sweep the board, because they don't want to be seen as a party that can only win in London. So if they do quite well, I think there's some elections in Stockton up in the northeast, and if they do quite well up there, they're going to be telling this story about how they're fighting back in the Red Wall and only they can win again and up north and all that kind of thing. And I think that's where they're going to focus their energy.
It's not just about Tory and Labour this stuff. I mean, I think what we're looking at here, I need to know the percentage and exactly where is voting outside London. But the Lib Dems, I think, are in the best position they have been for a local election in 20 years, maybe more, right? This is the situation where the government is very unpopular. It seems to have completely lost a large chunk of the country. A lot of those people don't vote Labour. A lot of those people would have never voted Labour. And what's more, once you go outside London, of course, there's lots of areas where there is no real history of voting Labour. So the Lib Dems become the opposition, and it's an easy, cheap vote, a cheap protest, mid-term vote Nobody thinks Lib Dems are going to run the country. Nobody thinks that they're like a national threat at all. And so a Tory that would vote for them in the general election, but is not happy about the cost of living, not happy about Partygate, doesn't trust Boris Johnson, whatever, all those reasons, it's an easy swap. And this is what's happened in the by-elections, isn't it? You know, there is no way on earth that the Lib Dems would win Shropshire North or Chesham and Amersham in a general election. Never. And yet they enjoyed an enormous swing, right? And like I say, I need to see precisely where is standing, but let's just say, I know there's some in Somerset. I expect it to be a great night for the Lib Dems in Somerset. And there'll be quite a few counties like that in England. And that's what I think will feed the narrative. Labour maybe only they'll go up 100 seats or down or mid 50 seats, whatever, but they'll be in a much better position relative to the Tories, because the Tories will get hit by Lib Dems and Greens as well.
I guess, William, how important for Boris' leadership are the local elections?
I've heard a couple of contrasting takes on this. Some, and again, the Chris Curtis thread, the long short of which was basically that they might not be sort of the massacre some people expect. I think they're very important. Long story short, my feeling has always been they are one of, I think, maybe 3-4 real moments of danger that might push him towards an exit. The other two actually possibly might be one in the same go, which is the conclusion of whatever happens to Partygate or whatever. But I think this is important, namely because if the Tories lose seats where they have a good standing already, that they'd be expected to win, and these are different because, as Neil said, you know, it's not always like for like local elections. It will just begin to bring back all the concerns that Tory MPs had. It will begin to make them aware of their vulnerability. They haven't had to do that, I don't think, the past couple of weeks, but a bad set of local elections would bring other weaknesses into play as well. If he has a par or a decent set of local elections, and again, framing and circumstances is going to be very important with this, I get the sense that it will be much easier for his acolytes to tell the party and to tell the members, and for them to believe that all of the issues at the beginning of the year were fluff and not of real substance, and that when it comes down to it, he's still, you know, our man. So no, a big moment, and if anything, actually possibly made bigger by the fact that we've had so much news and the narrative's changed so much recently.
I'm genuinely astonished at how much you can get away with. It's just like, why?
Yeah, I mean, I am too. I think a lot of people are, but there are unique and awful circumstances with him. I think that Paul and Neil probably can explain even better than I can, which just mean that this is the situation we're in. Intolerable in terms of trying to find good, effective leadership at times of not only national but international crises, but we are where we are with it.
Don't forget, you said a good word there in the middle of that. You said par. You know, par for the Tories in those local elections is losing ground. You know, a government that's been in power for 11 or 12 years will say to you, well, of course we expect to get a bit of a kicking in local elections. People are going to make a protest. It's just a question of whether it's a massacre or whether they just lose a little bit of ground. If he loses a few local councils, he doesn't really care. Doesn't make much difference to them. And he's going to be able to just swap that off pretty easily, I would have thought. It needs to be really bad for them for it to make a difference to him losing his job.
Yeah.
I've got to say, just leaving the betting out of it a minute. As a non, you know, I've had no one.
I'm afraid I can't do that. I'm sorry, I don't know how you find that easy.
But no one would mistake me for a Tory. From a non-Tory perspective, everything I'm hearing is just perfect, because I think very plausible. Both of you say that we just move on. They lose 500 seats. It's just written off as, oh well, you know, long-term government, and Boris stays in post. Every day that Boris Johnson stays in post is fantastic news for Labour, because he is entrenching. He has entrenched negative approvals. It's very Trump-like, where in the end, he'll make, as long as he's there, a large percentage of the public will not trust them, right? And Partygate doesn't have to be. This is the far more damaging effect of Partygate, that people don't take him seriously anymore. They know he's a liar, right? They may not think that was a particularly desperately important and resigning issue, but they know he's a liar. And every day he's there is good. And if the Tories do leave this whole rebrand thing until 2023, 24, it's very hard to just turn it around at that short notice when you've had a cost of living crisis. Whereas if they got rid of him now, then, you know, there's a long way, we're only halfway through the parliament, anything could happen. They could easily come back.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And it's the longer it goes on, the more he almost defines the image of that party, which is disgraceful, really, in many respects.
It's like Trump. It's a repeat of Trump on so many levels.
Well, I mean, you're definitely right in terms of when you talk about Trump, in terms of the way the electorate is now. It's very entrenched. I mean, lots of people, you know, like Johnson he's very Marmite, isn't he? He's either loved or he's hated. The people that love him really love him, and they won't change their mind. And the people that hate him really hate him, and they won't change their mind.
Neil, there's kind of ambivalence towards the Starmer-led Labour as opposed to Corbyn-led Labour.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? Because, you know, whatever you think about Corbyn, he was quite a similar character within the Labour Party, lots of and within Labour voters as well. You know, he was hated by some people and he was loved by other people, but you know, Starmer's not really, that's not a thing, you know, nobody really cares about him one way or the other. He's very vanilla. So I just feel like the way we're heading at the moment is that, you know, the younger people that Labour really need to get out. And when I say younger, I'm talking about people under the age of 45. I'm not talking about 25-year-olds. You know, the working population need to be getting out and turning out to vote Labour if they're to have any chance of winning an election with the new boundary changes and the voter ID. And, you know, every day that you wake up and read something that makes you think they're all in this together, they're all the same, none of them are like me, none of them are looking out for my family, Labour just can't win in that situation. They're betting on most seats the next election. I think 2 weeks ago, Labour hit 2.56. You know, they've drifted in the last 6 months. How can they be drifting given that, you know, the Tories' situation?
I think as Paul says, I think, like, in fairness to Keir Starmer, I think the less he does and the longer Boris is there, the happier he is.
Well, that's definitely his strategy. I just don't believe that will work.
I think it's a repeat of Cameron and Blair. It's how you do opposition, which is you be vanilla. You try and keep all the focus on the other guy.
That's not how I remember Blair. But, you know, having said that, Blair came in with a massive poll lead, so he just had to defend that.
Yeah, but he also made this. He was pretty vanilla, right? No one could have accused him of being extreme.
They had their pledge card, didn't they? They had a pledge card. They had a bunch of things that they said they were going to do if you voted.
Exactly, and that's what Starmer will do. Blair made crystal clear, I am vanilla. I'm not a socialist.
I remember sitting through many tedious people telling me that nobody understood what Labour's policies were at the last election because they didn't have time to explain them because they hadn't explained them properly. And those same people are now telling me that you have to wait until 3 weeks before the election before you tell anyone what you're going to do to make their life better. I think most people are bored by now. They just don't see politicians are going to help their life.
Okay, but in that environment, Labour are solidly now on 39-40%, considerably up from where they were a year ago. And I'm not, look, I hear what you're saying about turnout. I hear what you're saying, right? But at the same time, we're in dramatic times. What has actually happened, I think, in the past 5-6 years is that young people have realised politics does matter, right? They will turn out. And maybe they vote for Labour, maybe they vote for Green, but they're not voting Tory. And that's the critical thing.
We are going to have to finish up, but like, I'm looking at the news on Sunday night, and there's been like essentially massive heat waves in the North and South Pole, like off the charts climate stuff.
Oh, that's right. Cheer us up.
Didn't even make the news. And I do think in terms of the climate, what will happen between now and the next election, I think it could be quite dramatic. And I think that's going to be a big part of Labour's, I would hope, their manifesto on that. Well, I actually think 2.56 is a great bet on Labour. I can't see how they don't win the next election personally, but maybe I'm wrong on that and I don't understand as well as you guys. I don't know, William, what do you think?
I'm on. Well, I've laid the Tories at 1.57.
Great.
Yeah, I think that I might not hold it, but I just can't see that being the price that going any shorter.
My answer to this is basically really heavily weighed as to whether Boris Johnson is still there. I think if he's still there, that is the ideal platform for Keir Starmer's leadership / management style. And I think it can just about work. I think the biggest danger to him is a well-timed leadership change from the Tories. There's a couple of months at which there is a stage, I think, at which it becomes very difficult to disassociate Johnson and other poor cabinet performers and scandals, whatever, from the Tory party. I think that's pretty far in the future at the moment. I think if it's Starmer versus Johnson in the next election, I'd favour Starmer in some form in my betting strategy.
Starmer versus Boris in the next election is long odds on for me. Like, there's no way Boris can get away with this into the next general election. Maybe I'm wrong. We got to finish up on France, William. Our boy to deal with Putin, Macron, from the European perspective. I think he's 25s on now, which is this election is taking place in 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, indeed. And our hoodie-wearing diplomat is storming to victory at this time. At this time of speaking, long story short, Macron's diplomacy and presence on the world stage has done 2 favours to him. In one sense, it's put all the focus on him and has allowed him that sort of statesman-like presence. In a way, a more magnified effect of what Johnson has here, and also I think it's taken away from any sort of potential weaknesses, which there always are, I think, for a French president going incumbent. You know, it's difficult to have a really high approval rating there. I think probably more so. I might be spitballing here and completely wrong, but I think it seems to be it's more difficult there to be loved than it is elsewhere. The race to be second, to go up against him, to get to that second round, is really hotting up. Recently, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who held a huge rally in Paris recently, has really shot up. He's leapfrogged Eric Zemmour, according to the latest average of the polls. And then you have Valérie Pécresse, who's taken a bit of a backwards step. Hopefully, the intention is to have prices on who will make it to the second round, Woodstar and various other markets. I think we'd put Mélenchon in favourite if that was to be the case today, but things change very quickly.
I was going to ask Paul that. I wondered whether I saw Zemmour, he's gone real kind of Enoch Powell in the last couple of days, even more right-wing than he was already. And I wondered whether that split between the sort of far-right candidates could let Mélenchon through, but I was expecting that to be at a value price to come second or to get in the final 2 rather than at a particularly short price. I mean, I thought I thought he, I might get sort of 4 to 1 or something to come second.
You can. Well, you can. I've got 14 to 1 Betfair about 3 weeks ago on the top 2 finish. He's now about 7s.
Oh, is he? I hadn't looked recently. I'll have a look.
I still think that's a fair price, because what's going on here is that on both wings there is a filtering out of the one who can win. I think, Zemmour is in free fall. It looks finished. Le Pen's now getting twice as many votes as him, so she's going to be the far right candidate. How and then whether she can gain any more of his voters, I don't know, but that's what's happened. And on the left, as we've known for months, they're all sorting each other out. And Mélenchon has now burst ahead. There's quite a lot of votes there to squeeze. You've got 4% or 3-4%. Fabien Roussel, who is like the ex-leader of the Communist Party, right? Now, are those people really going to? Are 4% of people really going to vote Communist and not switch to Mélenchon if they can get him in the top 2? You've got other smaller leftist candidates, and you've also got the Greens on like 6.5%. Now, I had hopes that the Green guy, Yannick Jadot, could have come through and challenged. at a massive price, but he isn't doing it. So maybe that halves. And I think it's possible that Melancon nicks it, to be honest. I mean, I would predict, I'd probably price it about 4-1 that Melancon wins it.
We're closing in as well on the Northern Irish elections, which I think are going to be among the most interesting, really, since the formation of the state 100 years ago. But I just want to finish up, because I'm conscious of time. I'm going to ask you, Paul, how do you see this crisis in Russia, and when do you see this crisis in Russia effectively ending? We see today Navalny got a 9-year jail term or whatever. I'm just very conscious of what ordinary Russians think about this, what the morale of the army, and what the end game is for Putin. You spoke about Russia for months and months on end before all this happened. How do you see it ending up?
Well, I think that let's first of all assume Putin isn't going to be removed, right? If Putin isn't removed,
is that a big assumption?
I don't think it's that. It is an assumption, but I'm yet to be shown any kind of realistic, plausible way that happens. So right. Let's see. I think they're having a disaster, Russia, having an absolute catastrophe, and I think that he will strategically withdraw at some point while staying in parts of the country. And I just think that NATO will load up their troops in Poland, Lithuania, Romania, Estonia, all along there. There will be ever further tightness, squeezing of Russia internationally, then there'll be like a new Iron Curtain. We will go back, without the physical presence of the war, we will go back to a situation where that little group of mafia states controlled by Putin will be just cut out of the loop. And it's horrific for the people there. And it would be fantastic if there was something that we could do in the West to help them, fight for their rights, find out what's actually happening in the world. But that's above my pay grade.
That's a very, very erudite way, I think, of ending the show. It's very distressing times. 5 weeks into the Ukraine crisis now, no obvious sign of how it will end. But I think we got through a lot today between the UK, France, and Ukraine. We shall be back next week on The Polling Station.